Sea of Red, it's time for another Fireside Chat, the official podcast of Flames fans. It's go time.
Well, we're here less than 2 days after the least eventful trade deadline in Flames history that I can remember. As always, I'm Dan alongside Matt. Matt, we'll talk more about deadline in depth in a little bit, but were you surprised to see zero moves?
Frankly, a little bit. Although with the price tags that some people were getting, I definitely understand why they didn't add anything.
Well, let's get back to that in a little bit. Let's talk about the games that got us there and the one after before we dive into the deadline. The Flames played 4 games this past week. The first one was on Sunday. It was a game still on the road on their road trip. This was a 2-1 loss in OT against the Carolina Hurricanes, which meant the Flames dropped 3 in a row after this one. Wolf stopped 31 shots. I guess one way to look at it is, hey, if you can make Carolina go to extra time, you're probably doing okay. And if you can sneak away with at least 1 point against a good team like Carolina, probably doing good. But at the same time, I think the Flames really needed a win on this tough road trip.
Yeah, it was unfortunate that they struggled so mightily against some of the better teams throughout the road trip, and the lack of offense in that 3-game stretch where they got shut out by Tampa, shut out by Florida, and then only 1 goal for against Carolina. It's hard to win games against anybody if you're averaging like a third of a goal a game against good teams. Like, you need to do better. I
mean, going into this season, even the coach and the GM said scoring was going to be a challenge, right?
Yeah.
They knew that.
I don't think that they expected
now,
to be 32nd, though. But it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, who knows where they expect it to be, but we knew that, like, this is not a challenge that is surprising, right? We knew this was coming. The next game, the Flames, still on this long road trip that they have, went over to Philadelphia, took on the Flyers, and ended their skid here. Philadelphia has a 5-game point streak ended as well. The Calgary Flames get a 6-3 win in Philly. Kind of an interesting game because our 2 new players going back to Philly. Neither one of them scored, unfortunately, which would have been nice to see. But I thought a fun game to watch as a Flames fan. Frost did get two assists, even though he didn't score.
And it was nice to see Kuzi get a goal, even though it was against us. At least it was in the losing cause, and then he got traded like a couple days later. So, and
thanks for your help, GTFO.
And now we get to face him again at the end of the season when the Kings come in. When we do the makeup game in LA.
Who knows if we'll face him, though? I mean, he's not a guy I think might be on their active roster.
You never know.
I think this is an extra body for playoffs.
True.
But we'll see. But yeah, good game here to see. I thought Dustin Wolf playing back-to-back in these 2. He looked good. He had saved 26 of 29 shots here. And, 3 is more than you want to see on your goalie, but I thought that Wolf looked fine. I thought the whole team... I don't know if the team to me looked like they'd really changed a whole lot, but Philly's not a great team either, but it looked like they were able to keep up with the team, if that makes sense, which we haven't seen in some of these games.
And frankly, I thought that for as well as the Flames did, I felt that the goaltending for Philly was what really sank them in this game. Some of those goals were, frankly, unacceptable at the NHL level to give up. And, that ended up being the difference in the game was just so many bad goals by the 2 goaltenders. And the Flyers need to get a goalie who can actually make saves instead of, I'm big and I cover most of the net, because those types don't really work too often.
No, they don't. And I was kind of expecting that if Frost or Farabee scored, we might have got an interesting quote from Tortorella after this one. So I was kind of disappointed that we didn't, because Torts is always fun to watch when something irritates him.
But, doubling up the Flyers in their home rink, that's always a fun thing to do.
Yeah, I think any team that you're doubling up in their home rink is good. And we don't see the Flyers too often. The next one here, the Calgary Flames went to Dallas. This was the the culmination of this long road trip on Thursday, and the Flames dropped this one 3-2 again in overtime, so get a point out of this one. It was, I thought, a pretty competitive game by the Flames in this game. I was really happy with it. I thought Vladar looked fantastic in terms of what he was facing. Dallas, obviously a good team, and we'll talk more about them potentially later when we talk about the deadline and some of the things they did, but I thought the Flames looked like they were hanging on for most of this game with the Stars.
Yeah, and it's disappointing. Like, anytime that you get a lead against a team like Dallas, and a 2-0 lead, and then to squander that, especially the equalizer goal by Robertson on a failed block attempt by Uyghur that screened Vladar on a shot that really should not have gone in. It's tough, and like, the Flames do not really have the horses to go up against the Stars on the best of nights, and to actually get a 2-0 lead and only come away with 1 point is very disappointing, considering how tough of a team Dallas is.
For sure. And like I said, I mean, you're right. We don't have anywhere near the same firepower of Dallas, but I thought the Flames hung in there quite well.
And tribute to Vladar, he actually played very well in this contest, and we would not have got a point if it wasn't for him. Just unfortunate that the Uyghur screen shot got past him. If it wasn't for that, then the Flames collect the 2 points, and it happens.
You know what, though? At this point, against a good team like this and the road trip they had, you take the point, right? You take the point, you don't mention it, and you move on.
Although one thing that does irk me, like Conroy said, we went 500 for the road trip, and it's like, yeah, but you one of those wins was against a rather bad team, and you lost 4 of the other 5 games. Like, you got 2 loser points. That, to me, it does not really scream successful road trip. Like, you did lose 4 out of 5 against the good teams.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think points-wise, he's right. You went 500, and for a team like the Flames, I think we're looking for some positives on this team, or on this road trip, for this team, you've got to spin it a certain way.
It was
not a good trip, right?
Frankly, they got 4 points more than I was anticipating, given the quality of the opponents. But still, it's one of those where, like, the Flames did really struggle throughout the road trip.
And we knew they probably would. That was the Flames' last game before the trade deadline. The Flames management stayed over in Dallas and conducted their deadline business, whatever that was, on Friday the 7th, and then they were all home on Saturday as the Flames had a 5 p.m. Calgary start time. Hockey Night in Canada taking on the Montreal Canadiens. Wolf back in net, and Farabee scored the only goal in this one. He has points in 4 straight now as the Flames beat the Canadian 1-0.
Yeah, this was a tale of 2 very good rookie goaltenders showing everybody what they could do.
Yeah,
like, totally this game could have easily been a 5-4 game had the 2 goalies not been standing on their head. But, it was a classic goalie duel of Dobes and Wolf, and Wolf came out on top.
There's always a notion that 1-0 games are boring, that they're not interesting. This was totally the opposite.
Both teams were getting great chances, and the goalies were putting on a show.
They sure were. So after that, now the Calgary Flames have played 63 games. They have 30 wins, 23 losses, and 10 overtime losses for a total of 70 points, which puts them second in the wild card in the West right now. They are at 70 points. Minnesota holds the first wildcard spot at 76, and breathing right down the Flames' neck is Vancouver at 69 points and St. Louis at 69 points. Utah a little bit further down at 66. And as terrible as they are, Matt, somehow Anaheim has jumped above Seattle, Nashville, Chicago, and San Jose.
Well, that's not entirely surprising. Dostal has been really excellent for them, and they're starting to put together some parts of a team that can actually compete. Reminds me a little bit of the Coyotes from like 2 or 3 seasons ago, where you could see parts coming that to make a good team. Still a long way to go, though.
It is, for sure. Let's jump into trade deadline. So at this point, we know the trade deadline has come and gone. Some big moves made, some high prices paid. 2 former Flames moved, and we did not make a move. The Calgary Flames stand pat for I can't remember last time they did nothing at a deadline. Obviously made a big move before that in the deal with Philly, but let's break this down piece by piece. What do you think about the Flames' decision to do nothing?
Well, it on one hand, it is understandable because they did not have any significant unrestricted free agents. Like, the only guy that was worth anything was Dan Vladar. And realistically...
Come on, Kevin Rooney's an unrestricted free agent.
As I said, players that are worth anything.
They have unrestricted free agents, but none of value. Yeah.
Vladar, though, like, from all reports, like, the best offer was like a 4th-round pick, which... with Cooley playing poorly on the farm and not really having any other options as a backup, to only get a 4th-round pick for Vladar just did not make sense, and keeping him was the better option. Whether or not we actually keep Vladar beyond this season or not, I think is kind of irrelevant, because it'll be up to him to see if he wants to try to be a starter on another team, or is content just being 1B with Wolf for the foreseeable future.
Well, and you and I talked last week as well, but not a lot of market out there for goalies. Not a lot of teams needed goalies, and I think that was proven out that on the deadline day, only one goalie moved, and that was Chicago moving Peter Mrazek to Detroit. Like, there wasn't it didn't seem like there was a high demand for goaltenders.
No, and like, realistically, the only team that could have actually used some help in the net was Edmonton, and like, there was no way that the Flames were going to help them out.
Nope. I'm kind of surprised that Edmonton didn't even go looking at Mrazek.
No, you would have figured that, like, whether it was Vanacek or Mrazek or any of the goalies that moved over the last couple of months, that they would have checked in on any of them to see if they could.
Well, and they were probably checking on everything, but the price for Mrazek was fairly achievable. For Edmonton, I think.
Oh yeah, so. Like, a failed prospect in Joey Veleno for Mrazek and something like. Like, if the Oilers had thrown a 3rd-round pick, I think that would have beat what Detroit gave up, and yet they did not do that. And
you and I talked about needing wanting the Flames to broker some deals, and we really didn't see the need for brokers this year like we have over the last couple of years, taking on bad contracts or even taking on a half contract and then flipping a guy to another team. There was very little, if any, brokering going on. A little bit leading up to the deadline, but I don't think any actually on deadline day.
Yeah, and
I think a lot of this comes down to the fact that the deadline or the salary cap's going way up next year, so nobody has that kind of need for moving money.
Yeah, and Conroy himself said that they did have a couple of offers on the table to do salary retention, but it wasn't just for the 1 year, and that's why they decided against it, which I 100% agree. Like, you do not need to tie up multiple years of retention slots for nothing, basically. Like, it would be different if we were getting like a 1st-round pick for doing that, but the likely return's like a 4th-round pick, and like, that just does not make any sense for us to do.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the cost and you want me tied up multiple years, depending on how many years, you could still do it, I think, but the cost's going to be a lot higher, and teams probably just didn't want to pay that cost. Plus, because of this, everybody has some cap space next year, so it's probably easier to find a broker who would take that on if you needed it. We weren't competing with only 1 or 2 markets. I mean, I think Detroit was even used to broker here. I think that the Flames, because of next year's salary cap going up, the Flames were not a unique team that was one of the few available to broker.
Yeah, and like, having the cap space itself isn't a bad thing heading into the off season. Like, when your only unrestricted free agents that are leaving are Rooney, Hanley, and Vladar, like, between them, I think they make around $4 million. Like, you have plenty of money to go and spend on other assets instead of being locked in where...
Yeah, either internally or externally.
Yes.
Like, we got to remember, these guys are going to have to probably give Wolf a raise in the next little bit here.
Yes.
And so that's going to be something that has to be considered and thought about, and, money kept for that.
Mm-hmm. Myself, looking at the trade deadline as a whole, like, I was a little disappointed that we didn't, especially with the price tags that were being paid, did not move away from guys like Anderson, Coleman, Kadri, etc. But I do understand that due to the fact that they still have a year plus on their deal, that you can still do those trades at the draft if you need to or want to.
And all the prices that were paid were really for 1-year rentals. We don't know if we could have got the same price for a 2-year guy.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, I was looking at that too, and I was looking at some of the prices going, yeah, maybe it's worth selling, but I totally understand them not selling, and, I respect that. On the salary retention front, I mean, we talked last week about how I said I'd be disappointed if they didn't retain salary, but the fact there was seemingly no salary to retain, you can't be too upset about that.
No, it'd be one thing, like, if other teams came in and, like, retained salary and we were just sitting twiddling our thumbs. But,
exactly.
like, there was nothing there, so...
That's it, yeah. If someone else did it and you're like, well, why didn't we take them up on that? That would have been different. But, no, I agree with you. It's like, we can't do something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and another concern that I had just generically about the composition of the team itself, like, frankly, heading into the offseason on the forward group, we only have one spot being opened up by Rooney's departure. Everybody else is under contract or restricted free agent. Especially with the acquisitions of Frost and Farabee. And, like, some work is going to have to be done just generally to create space on the forward roster to make changes. Because you look at, like, on the farm, like, guys like Sam Honzig and William Stromgren are not far off from pushing their way into the lineup. And with the Flames being 32nd in goals for, you're going to want to try to bolster some offense. And, it'll be hard to attract free agents if you're not having a roster spot that's actually available without, creatively maneuvering people. So
I don't think the Flames are too worried about free agents at this point, though, Matt. I think these guys are worried about bringing from internal.
True. It's just one of those things where it's hard to, because of the constraints that they have now with the roster spots, to, like, they don't have any flexibility at this point to make changes. So that will be something
I'm
they
sure
have
that
to
if
address.
somebody deserves a spot, they will make a spot available.
Yeah. Well, and I also look at the Frost and Farabee acquisitions as functionally replacing Backlund and Coleman in the lineup with younger versions of those players. I don't think Frost is quite as good as defensively as Backlund, but he is better offensively than Backlund, and Coleman and Farabee are basically the same player. So I feel that the Flames... in this effort to retool, I think that they've now made some astute additions with that trade, and I think that on the flip side, you're going to have to see certain players move out in order to create the room for new people to be added.
Yeah, no, I think, let's have that discussion in the offseason, but I definitely think that there will be guys that may need a move, and I think the team will be more than happy. If you can take an NHL spot, they will make one available for you.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to Frost and Farabee, this was a deal that was done before the Four Nations Cup. The Flames really only trade this year. When I'm looking at that and I'm looking at what the cost and the deadline was, I feel like the Flames actually did a good job by making that deal earlier, because if you made that deal deadline day, probably would have cost you a lot more and you wouldn't have been able to do it. Like, it feels like...
Yeah, frankly, like, Frost and Farabee would not have been Flames if the deal was done at the deadline. Like, somebody else would have paid a lot more for those two players.
So I feel like that was kind of Conroy buying at the right time. And even if it's not deadline day, and again, fans like the fun and the excitement of deadline day, but you know what? I think the Flames made the deal they needed to make at the right time.
Yeah, no, and it's good on Conroy for continually checking in on people and, pushing the issue and making a good trade when he can. And like that was a home run of a trade. Like basically Philadelphia's return from that was a second, a third, a seventh, and Peltier. Adding the proceeds from the Kuzmenko trade. And, to me, to get Frost and Farabee, like that's a home run deal for that kind of return.
For sure. I saw a lot of Flames fans on deadline day on social media talking about, the Flames should have been in on Shen or should have been in on, Brandon Tanev or a number of names that were out there, Luke Kunin. I think you and I both agree that this was not the time to add.
No, like realistically, the only thing that would have made the deadline worse is if they would have spent the prices that were required to add. Like, I do get the idea of standing pat and allowing the guys just to finish out the season. It probably would not have necessarily been what I would have done, but I do get it. However, adding, like, unless you're adding a scorer that's like an elite caliber scorer to add that has term and is willing to stay here, and how many arms and legs is that going to cost? Like there, with the team being 32nd in goals for, like there is not really any onus on the team.
Yeah, there's no way you're going to trade your way out of that in one day.
No, like this is like we're going to need to address this over like the next 4 or 5 seasons.
Which is what a rebuild is.
Yes, exactly. And it's like, okay, congrats, you guys. You are in a playoff spot and playoff hunt. You get the opportunity to finish out the season. And like, do I think the Flames make the playoffs? No. But I do understand because of the fact that everybody is under contract for next season that there is no harm in allowing them to finish out the season and then revamp the team.
You gave me some help with Frost and Farabee. I don't know what other help you would have been able to go get that would have been worth the price.
No, because like if you look at like the only trade that would have been somewhat relevant to the Flames was the Dylan Cousins trade. And, like, frankly, to give up Zari plus multiple other assets to get Cousins, it just doesn't make sense from our point of view. Like the difference between Zari and Cousins, I don't feel is significant enough to warrant that kind of a move.
And even giving up like a fourth for Luke Kunin, that's not going to move this team any further ahead.
No, like we're basically stuck where we're at, and you might as well just let the season run out and hope for the best. If you get in the playoffs, awesome. If you don't, well, hey, considering everybody expected you to be a bottom 5 team, to be in a playoff spot after the trade deadline, that is one hell of an achievement. And
whatever happens from here on out is, gravy, essentially.
Yes.
Nobody expects the Flames to be anywhere near the playoffs, and so the fact they're still in this, I think is good. And I give Conroy credit because there probably was a discussion had in their war room about, do we go out and do we make an addition? Do we want to make that playoff push? Do we want to abandon our sort of, system we've got going? And I really give him credit for sticking with it and not making a deal for the sake of making a deal, but saying, we didn't see a deal we liked. We think we've got the guys to do whatever it is they're going to do. These are the guys that got themselves into this situation. Let's see what they do with it. And as much as it's not exciting for fans, I think it was a smart move to not do anything based on what we're seeing in the market. You can't just go to a team and say, I'm taking this player, whether you like it or not, right? You need a dance partner, and I don't see who the right partner would have been.
No, and realistically, that kind of flexibility does not really open up until the draft itself. And that was part of why, I was kind of hoping to acquire some assets so that way we could go shopping at the draft itself for teams that are wanting to possibly move in different directions on certain players and like retool their organizations, where like they wouldn't want to do that deal during the deadline, but some guys might be available at the draft instead. And like, to be fair, like the Flames still have 2 firsts, a second, and a third in the top 90. So, like they have plenty of draft capital, whether they use that on players or use them in trades. So
yeah, I mean, we'll debate this when we get closer. I don't think you use that to bring in players. I think right now you've got to be willing to run with what you've got internally. Maybe you make 1 or 2 off-season, free agent signings, but I don't think this is the time to go out and use, your picks to bring in a big fish.
Yep.
But we can talk about that more as we get close to the end of the season. So I guess going into the year now or going into the playoffs, I mean, they couldn't find a buyer for Hanley. They couldn't find a buyer for Maramanov. I don't see why anyone would have wanted those pieces. We've talked about they're both having off years, and, I think right now we wouldn't have had anything better in the pipeline, so you just run those pieces and see what we get.
Yep, exactly. And it'll give you more of an idea strategy-wise on like what you want to do with certain veteran players and frankly like what you're missing throughout your lineup, and gives you certain targets to shoot for either in free agency or at the draft. Like, say, getting a top 4 defenseman, so that way Joel Hanley isn't there, I think is going to be, like, priority number 1, and scoring priority number 2.
Yeah, I think scoring can come internally in some ways. I think if you look at guys like, Honzig and some of the internal options, you may be able to address the scoring. But, we'll probably see Zane Parekh, whether NHL or AHL next year. He's definitely turning pro, but that's an option for some D there. But, yeah, there's some work that has to be done for sure. Mm. I did some research here, Matt. The last time the Flames were inactive on trade deadline day, from what I'm seeing, it looks like 1994, 2012, and 2025 are the only real times. In 2019, they made only one move, acquiring Oscar Fantenberg from LA for a conditional 4th-round pick. And in 2012, the Flames were in a playoff run. They didn't do anything there because they were relying on guys coming back from injury to fill some of those spots. So I guess a rare year this year to see the Flames do absolutely nothing.
Yep, only the 3rd time in Flames history. That's kind of a neat little
it is, isn't it?
Piece of trivia, because it certainly, you're always expecting, whether it's shipping off a guy like Rooney or adding a guy like Fantenberg, that, like, something.
That's it. And even when the deadline was over, I kept refreshing, because there's always those late deals that come in. And
yeah,
they must have done something.
They
must have done something.
Type thing like last year where like an hour after the deadline, we got him too, apparently. And
last year they also made an AHL trade, and I was kind of thinking, okay, I could see them doing something, either an AHL trade or a veteran for their AHL team to bolster the Wranglers going into the playoffs. But for an hour after the deadline,
speaking of the Wranglers, they're on a bit of a run of not being good. 1-6-3-1 in their last 11 games.
You can't be good all season.
No, it's just if they don't turn it around soon, like they're actually in danger of actually missing the playoffs outright. Which
Cooley hasn't looked great since the All-Star game, and I think it's going to depend on him getting back to form.
Yep, it's just it'll be interesting to see.
But that's also
Soloviev
why I thought they might do something
yeah.
to bring in some help down there.
Well, with Soloviev and Klapka getting reassigned to the Wranglers, I think that was to try and help boost and bolster that lineup.
And while you talk a lot about the option of bringing up Wranglers guys after the trade deadline, I think they're going to keep as many bodies down there as they can to help that team.
Like realistically, I don't see anybody getting recalled unless of injury or it's like the last week against like San Jose, Vegas, LA, and the Flames are out of it. Then I could see like a guy like Stromgren and Honzek getting pulled up. Just hey, here's a reward for or insert NCAA signing.
I think you'd
here.
also have to do it where Well, NCAA guys wouldn't probably come to Calgary. They'd go down there. But yeah, if you could backfill down in the Wranglers, you probably would. But even then, if they're going to pull a guy up, there's probably got to be no Wranglers game that day. Like, they're going to want to sacrifice the Wranglers for the Flames. So we'll see what happens with it. But yeah, I'm expecting that they might be a little more conservative than usual with that.
Oh.
Two interesting Flames, I thought, or former Flames that got moved. You mentioned Oliver Shillington earlier. Oliver Shillington sent to LA along with a 7th round pick for a 3rd round pick. This is a guy who Flames fans thought that when he was a Flame, and you and I talked about it too, you'd probably have to pay somebody to take him. And now he's been traded for value twice in the season, which is kind of interesting to me. It shows that maybe GMs still see something in him, and we talked about him going back to Russia next year. Obviously, somebody thinks he can be still of use to their team.
Well, when you score 39 goals at the NHL level and you're only 2 years removed from it, you're going to have a long list of teams that are going to say, hey, maybe we can actually unlock this guy to get back to what he was. I wouldn't even be surprised if he got signed for cheap next year in the NHL just to see if he can rekindle that. But good on the Flames and the Flyers for getting value out of Kuzi. And, at least Kuzi will be playing in the playoffs, so good for him. Not really much to say. Just hope that he plays well down the stretch and can earn a job next year.
And then Oliver Shillington, a guy that I know, you were really pushing for the Flames to bring into the end of last year, ended up going to Colorado. They were depleted at some points this season. The fact they had playing forward for some games. He got traded as part of the Brock Nelson deal to the Islanders, and then immediately flipped from the Islanders to Anaheim for future consideration, which to me is still confusing. Why you wouldn't have just sent him to Anaheim in the first place if he was flipped less than 2 minutes later?
The reason why is that the Islanders really want it to be considered in the future, and you can't do that if you just flip them right away.
You probably could have got Colorado to consider you in the future. I'm sure that they would have added that into the deal if you wanted it. Brock Nelson, William Dufour, and future considerations for Callum Ritchie, the first and the conditional third is still a good deal.
Yeah. Well, the Islanders just want to be thought of. They're lonely.
I'm sure at some point on the deadline, you could have got somebody to consider you in the future. I would love to see, if I was a GM, I think just to do it, if I was Conroy, so I didn't make no moves, I would have traded future considerations for future considerations.
Yes, we're thinking of you. Congrats.
That's right. These two teams will think of each other later, but we just want to do something today.
Yep.
So we traded future considerations back and forth.
I'm sure the trade office would be like, guys, F off. We got actual work to do.
That's right. But it would be funny if somebody did that. So based on what we're seeing now and what we've seen shake down from the Western Conference, I guess, playoff teams, and let's talk specifically about the teams around the wild card, do you think this is going to impact the Flames and their ability to make the playoffs?
I think that the Flames' path is slightly easier due to the Canucks trading off Soucy. They're just a little thinner on the blue line than they were. But, like Utah, St. Louis, Anaheim, Vancouver, and us didn't really do much at the trade deadline. So I think that more or less it's just going to be a dogfight of who can play, who can limp over the line, basically, because I think all four teams kind of suck in their own ways, and it'll be just who's the least bad of the four teams will get in to get annihilated by Winnipeg.
I think that the deep playoff rounds are a lot more interesting now. I think Dallas is a lot more interesting. I think Florida is a lot more interesting. I think that there's some interesting things that'll happen later because of these moves, and I think it's more and more visible now that the Flames probably don't make it out of the first, even if they get there. I had some thoughts of, well, maybe they could beat this team, maybe they could be that team. all the teams above them have bulked up. So I think
realistically, the
seventh.
only team that I think that they could actually beat is Winnipeg, just because Winnipeg has the history of choking in the playoffs. And even then, it's like a 10% chance, and that's only if Wolf stands on his head, like Ottinger did that one year.
Yeah.
No, and across the league, I feel that like two teams had an exceptionally terrible trade deadline. One being the Buffalo Sabres, giving up Cousins for an off-injured guy, and another player that's not even very good in Bernard Docker. And the Edmonton Oilers, who basically tried to fill the holes of Holloway and Broberg by spending all of the picks that they got from St. Louis and a first plus other things just to get lesser versions of Broberg and Holloway. So good offseason by them to get rid of two homegrown talents that actually wanted to play for them and get the IKEA version of those guys to replace them.
Yeah, it was not a good time Buffalo, but like you and I talked about last week, right? I mean, this is why one of many reasons people don't want to go to Buffalo, right? So there's no way that you are going to, move a guy like Kadri down there, especially I've seen some of those deals. If we went to him an hour later and said, "Hey, you want to waive to go to Buffalo?" He would have said, "I want to stay as far away from Buffalo as I can."
Yeah.
So I agree with you on this one. I think that there's no real material impact to the Flames. Yes, Soucy got moved. I think Vancouver, I don't think they're going to make it anyways. I think they're on the downslide there.
Yeah, like if I had to bet on one of those four teams making it, would probably be St. Louis out of them. But, frankly, it'll be them or us, and I think it'll be close one way or the other.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on that. I think it could be the Flames still. I don't think it's going to be Vancouver, but I think Calgary and St. Louis, and none of those teams made material changes that would really impact the Flames at all. It's not like, the team right above us or right below us is that much better. They're going to blow by us. So I think you see this pack of teams that really stood pat.
Yeah, and a move that Vancouver made that was kind of bizarre was either not re-signing or not trading Brock Besser. And I think the way that they handled it pissed Besser off. And, like they might end up losing that player for nothing on July 1st. And Vancouver seems extremely unprepared for how to manage a hockey team, frankly. Like with the whole JT Miller and Pedersen thing, like, the whole Pedersen thing, like it's gonna, like they're probably going to have to add several pieces just for some other team to take him next season if they move on from him. And to be fair, like I would not trade Huberdeau 1-for-1 for Pedersen at this point.
Nope. But if we let's not focus too much on the Canucks. If people want Canucks news, they can listen to our friends at Shift and Pucks. They have all the Canucks news. But yeah, I mean, that team, I think we can say in general, has had a rough season, both on and off the ice. And I think changes ought to be made. And maybe letting Pedersen walk is the best thing for that team right now.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the fact that they either didn't want to or there was no value for him at the deadline, I think says something. So we've made it past the deadline, which means we're in the back half of the season. Teams are, we got just over a month left. It's currently the 9th of April, and our last game the 9th of March, and our last game is the 17th of April. So just over a month left in the season. Matt, we have a weird week coming up. We've only got two home games all week, which I guess after a long road trip is probably nice for the Flames. Surprising they didn't drop the one at home after the road trip. But they don't play Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday. They will play Wednesday, 7 p.m. against the Vancouver Canucks, and then Friday against the Colorado Avalanche. Last week, you and I made some predictions that were both wrong. I thought they'd lose all but Philadelphia. You thought they'd lose all four. They ended up 50-50 or 500. What do you think we do for these two games?
I think we beat Vancouver, and I think we lose to Colorado.
And you see Wolf in both?
Probably. You might see Vladar in Colorado.
Colorado has just gotten that much nastier to play against.
Yeah, like I think because that's kind of a scheduled loss, that you might as well throw Vladar to the Wolves in that one, and save Wolf for a game against a slightly easier opponent.
Yeah, you might. I think with the rest in there, like even after that, there's 2 days rest before they go on another road trip. I could totally see Wolf doing both. It's interesting because outside of the Vancouver game, really for the rest of the month, there's no games against teams that are right around us in the standings. Like we play Colorado, then we play a bunch of Eastern teams, then Seattle, then Dallas, then Edmonton, then Colorado. So this Vancouver game, I think, is going to be important for the Flames because they've got to put a little bit of distance between them and the Canucks, and they've got to take care of their own business, not rely on other people to do it.
Yeah, and looking ahead just a bit, like after this week and the Toronto game on Monday, the Flames are playing 4 games in a row against somewhat middle of the road teams. So I think that getting through the 3 big ones first will be quite the test for the team. And I feel like, especially after they got spanked hard by Toronto and Colorado last month, right before the break, they lost to Toronto 6-3 and Colorado 4-2, that they need to have a better showing against each of those teams, and it'll be nice to see if they can respond and possibly pull out 2 points against either of those teams.
I'm gonna be crazy this week, Matt. I'm gonna say they win both.
Okay.
I think they'll win. I had the same thought as you going in, but I'm just thinking, I think Colorado might come in here and underestimate the Flames a little bit, and you might see the Flames be able to get that win there.
That makes sense.
So and I think the Flames are going to be very rested too going into the Vancouver game. So we'll see what happens, but I'm already behind in the predictions points, so I'll be crazy and try to get a point there.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. You gotta try to make up some ground somehow.
That's right. Just like the Flames trying to make up ground this week. And I think you see Wolf in both. I think, yes, there's a scheduled loss factor, but if we're trying to see what our young goaltender has as a starter, you have to see what he's got against adversity, which is the job of a starter. So unless there's an injury or something, I think I would put Dustin Wolf in both. He gets enough rest between the games that I don't see any problem there, and maybe you'll play Vladar more on the road trip.
Yep.
But I'm expecting 2 Wolf starts this week.
That makes a ton of sense.
Well, I think that wraps up a fairly uneventful trade deadline show. We didn't have a ton to talk about. We weren't sure how much we'd have here, but I think that pretty much covers the week for the Flames.
Oh, and it's nice to see Joel Farabee actually getting on the score sheet. I know he struggled quite a bit in his first 8 or 10 games with the Flames, but him getting off the schneid a bit, hopefully that's just a nice thing to see on a regular basis moving forward.
Farabee and Frost are now Albertans. It's official. I don't know if you saw, but they have gone out and they're living together and they bought a truck.
Yep.
So they're now officially Albertans. They've got their truck. So they have embraced being Calgary Flames.
Yep. And as always, go Flames go.
Fireside Chat is hosted by Dan Stevenson, co-hosted by Matt DeBorg. This episode produced and edited by Peter Marino. Fireside Chat is licensed under Creative Commons license. For full license details, visit firesidechat.ca.